Do you think after Trump is no longer at the top of the GOP, what happens to this party that has, in essence, gotten rid of anyone who could challenge him? Very similar to Vladimir Putin's Russia, where there's no Aaron waiting, right? What happens to the GOP after there's really no Aaron waiting? I mean, he has gotten rid of anyone who could really challenge him. I'm just curious your thoughts on that, Aaron.
I'm really excited to get there, and it's going to be there kind of sooner than we think because, we're going to get through the midterms and then everybody's going to be kind of obsessed with 2028. I can see that already kind of like happening and kind of percolating in the discourse.
Yeah.
It's a really good question because, you're right that, something the Democrats should take a little bit of comfort in is just the fact that Trump isn't going to be on the ballot anymore and that, he has this demonstrated ability to get kind of low engagement people to go out and vote for him. And, he has a certain charisma among conservative people or like right-leaning people where for whatever reason they find him endearing or kind of like authentic, and you can't really force that if you don't have it. And I think we've already seen that Rubio doesn't really have it. He's tried. I don't think JD Vance has it. Now, I still don't really want to put, I don't want to be too kind of sanguine about this because of course 2 years ago Republicans were campaigning on they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and they won everything. So I thought that choice in 2024 was very clear, and obviously it wasn't, and I was too optimistic about that. And so I don't want to be like, because things are so bad and Republicans are getting blamed, because they have all the power and people don't like the economy and, people don't like the war in Iran and they don't like kind of the erraticness of Trump and the fact that he's like all up in their face every day. I don't want to conclude from, or, kind of infer from that Democrats are going to clean up this year, because I think that the propaganda works. And even sometimes when it seems really dumb to yourself or myself, like for whatever reason,
it makes sense to someone.
It resonates, and you have to at least kind of leave your mind open to those possibilities.
For some of the, you brought up a good point about the cats and the dogs. And I think Americans really got an understanding of who JD Vance was during that whole scandalous controversy where they were falsely accusing Haitian Americans of eating cats and dogs. My question is, Vance, and there's all this sort of horse race which between Vance and Rubio supposedly in the press. Vance doesn't have this sort of, and I'll use quote charisma of Donald Trump, because Trump to some does have charisma. How does Vance figure into all this, into the second term?
I think people on the left of the political spectrum are a little bit inclined to underestimating Vance. I think we saw a little bit of it during the 2024 campaign, where the fact that the vice presidential debate kind of went like it did, I think Tim Walz bears a lot of responsibility for that. But, JD Vance is kind of a smooth bullshitter, and he's the type of guy who can kind of, lie very brazenly in a way, with kind of like a smirk. I mean, even that clip that you played at the top of the show where, he's asked if he would apologize to the victims' families if it turned out that their civil rights were violated. And I remember that clip because you can almost see a little gleam in Vance's eye, where it's like he kind of knows that he's full of shit, but there it is, like he's saying it anyway. And I do think that is something that appeals to a lot of people on the right, kind of the, getting one over on the libs and being unapologetic and having kind of a gleam in your eye when you do it. Now, is that enough for him to win like a general election? I'm not sure about that. But, a lot of that oppo was out there on Vance 2 years ago, the whole like cat ladies thing. And, a lot of the comments he had that were very kind of regressive in terms of his views on women and just kind of, cultural mores and things like that. And it wasn't enough to be like a deal breaker, even to prevent him from getting on the ticket with Trump. And, of course, he won in a year in Ohio in 2022, which that wasn't a great situation, obviously, for Democrats, but Trump wasn't on the ballot and he was able to win that year, and that's difficult for Republicans to win when Trump isn't on the ballot. So, I don't want to like totally dismiss him, but I do think he doesn't quite have the same charisma that Trump does among the Republican base. And, I guess my hunch, though, kind of very broadly, is that whoever Trump coronates, I think will end up being the nominee. I still feel like he has enough of a hold over the Republican base that I couldn't really see someone being able to overcome Trump, going after them on social media, or kind of rallying his propaganda forces and right-wing media against them. So, but there's also a chance that he maybe, kind of does like a dual endorsement of Rubio and Vance and kind of lets them, fight it out. So, but I mean, because of what we've seen with, the egregious corruption, the criminality, that's all the more reason for Trump to really hold on, have a death grip, on, if not the presidency, at least the Republican Party, so we can kind of use that as a center of power to maintain his own position. But, it's also worth thinking about. I mean, I've heard Josh Marshall advance this theory that when you look at even like the True Social scheme that they're rolling out next week, where they're going to be charging people for first access to the posts from Trump and other market movers, so it's basically like, it's like simulating insider trading. Yeah. But, if Trump wants to keep the gravy train going with schemes like that, that's a really strong incentive not to kind of cede power. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying he's going to like remain president, but like, could he try to coronate Ivanka, where he can kind of keep things in the family, or one of his sons? Because once you kind of let that go and it gets to a point where Trump's posts are no longer moving markets because he's not, the president of the United States, then that's going to take money out of his pocket in a way. So I do think that's something worth considering, at least when it comes to the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing reporting, and obviously we know about January 6th. We know about his desire to overturn a lawful election that millions of Americans have voted in. So it sort of begs the question, why wouldn't he do it again? He's already said that the reason why he's so corrupt now is that he saw no one cared. He said, "Oh, no one cared what I did," right? So I think he has every incentive to try to do it again, because he has already said that he believes that any race, maybe a federal race, state race, that Democrats win is rigged, and any race that Republicans lose is rigged. Thus, it's only fair if he always wins, right? I don't know how this is going to shake out, to be very honest, for the midterm, because he's giving every indication that he would like to remain in office, or remain in office with a Republican majority. Aaron, I'm curious, you've been around now for a couple speakers of the House, some Democrats, some Republicans. And I imagine you have opinions on many of them. Where does Speaker Mike Johnson, in your opinion, and as a journalist, where do you think he is in terms of respect for his office and belief in, the Constitution?
I think he's definitely even lower than Kevin McCarthy, but I think part of that is circumstance, because of course, McCarthy was only speaker when Trump was not president. And right. So, I think part of the thing with Johnson is that he has to kind of contort himself not to contradict Trump, because all it would take would be Trump to post a True Social screed kind of saying, it's time for new leadership. And that'd be the end of Mike Johnson. So he has to kind of, make these absurd comments about how, I'm too busy to see the thing that Trump said about, ending Iranian civilization, or, he's making billions from crypto. I haven't read that report yet, So, I mean, it's completely pathetic, obviously. And, when you look at the kind of list of accomplishments that Johnson has, I mean, it's basically just kind of doing a tax cut bill, right? Which is sort of, that's kind of all Republicans ever really want to do. But, it's not like he has big legislative accomplishments that he can tout. And he seems very happy sort of abnegating his own power and responsibilities by just ceding authority to the White House, and kind of, the notion of checks and balances is kind of a farce when it comes to the Johnson speakership and the Trump administration. So, I mean, being worse than the Kevin McCarthy is an extremely low bar, but I think Mike Johnson easily clears it. And so I'd have to say he's easily, I don't go as far back as like the Hastert days. So, there might be other speakers that are even worse, but at least since I've been paying attention to politics, I think he's the worst one.